Hi, this is Miss Slitton, and this is a very teeny tiny little review the day before Thanksgiving break for chapter 15. And this is about, oh, you guys are here too, Darwin and evolution. So let me just tell you, kind of run down on this. You want to know for sure a little bit about Darwin. Like he went on a trip. Where did he go? Galapagos Islands. Good. Oh, yay. Did you know that Darwin went on a trip? And he was the naturalist on that trip. Do you remember that part? Okay, because you're not saying anything. And what would we say about Darwin? What did he come up with? Mechanism for evolution, perhaps? And what is that mechanism called? Yes, that's right. Natural selection. They're just rocking and rolling. What? Oh, it's a good day. Okay, then we'll put a pin in that. We'll come back to Darwin, and let's go through a little bit of the. We'll go through the history of evolution. Now, remember, pay attention to the ones that I didn't make mini-me's, right? The other ones are there for support. So key things about Linnaeus is binomial nomenclature. And remember, we're working up against creationism and fixity of species, that it's unchanging, which is what he thought. Leclerc was the 44-volume history. He was trying to identify all known plants and animals. That's what he is known for. But the thing about Leclerc is about some of the things that we look at now for as evidence of evolution. When you look at geographical isolation, when you look at the struggle for existence, these are all things that now we talk about in our explanation for evolution. Erasmus Darwin, I believe he's a mini-me on your notes. Is that accurate? But he is Charles Darwin's grandfather. He talked about the possibility of common descent, but he didn't have a mechanism for it. But he definitely looked at vestigial structures. Do you remember what vestigial structures are? Remnants. Good. And it points to where you came from, because you're not. That is not critical to your survival anymore. It may have atrophied or gone away, but it points to where you came from. Like penguins have what? Look at me. What do penguins have? Wings. Do they fly with those? Do they fly with those wings? No. Could they have in their ancestral past? Yes. What do they use their wings for now? Swimming. That would be a vestigial structure. All right. Cuvier, father of paleontology, he looked at fossils. But he was a proponent of catastrophism in order to explain how things changed over time when you studied fossils. He didn't attribute it to things evolving. He just said major catastrophes happened and only certain organisms survived, which really is something we talk about when we do talk about evolution, but he still believed in fixity of species. Lamarck, definitely no Lamarck, okay? So Lamarck was the first to give a mechanism. He was just wrong. So he talked about acquired characteristics. So he thought the reason why things evolved is because they acquired attributes during their lifetime, and then they passed those on to their offspring. So things you acquired in your lifetime. We now know, right? You can only pass on what's in your genes. So he was mistaken, but he was the first to give a mechanism. Lyell wrote a book called Principles of Geology, and it was based on some ideas of Hutton, I believe. And this is the idea that the Earth is old. And having an old Earth is really significant because it allows time for evolution to occur. You guys have studied Thomas Malthus, some of you have, and about the struggle for existence. Do you want to do the questions, or do you want me to just keep reviewing? Questions? Tell me.
Review.
Keep going or do the questions?
Questions.
All right. Let's log in as our favorite Thanksgiving food. Wait, let me remove. Here we go. Yes.
Quiz chapter 14. I'll do it in the 10-minute passing period.
Okay, all right, yeah, I just had somebody do it. Yeah. There we go, rice, favorite Thanksgiving food. That's what everybody says, rice. I'm gonna pause this for a minute, and when we go over them, let's restart it. Okay, we're back. Let's see how you did. 44 volume history, that is Leclerc, not Linnaeus. One person picked Linnaeus. Guys, what was Linnaeus about? Binomial nomenclature. Okay, just checking. Number 2, all should be Linnaeus. Good. Somebody put Lamarck. What word should come to mind when you see Lamarck? 2 words. Acquired characteristics. Good. So, okay. First to state that evolution happened, descent with modification, and that organisms become adapted, that would be Lamarck. Instead, one person said Cuvier. What one word that should come to mind when you see Cuvier? Paleontology? Catastrophism? Sure. Somebody put Charles Darwin? No. No, he was not the first. Erasmus Darwin, the physician, naturalist, common descent, looked at artificial selection and vestigial structures. That was Erasmus Darwin. He was a physician. Darwin was not a physician. He was a naturalist, but not a physician. Catastrophism, paleontology, Cuvier. How do you remember that one? Covered with dirt, right? The fossils are covered with dirt. And, wow, Charles Darwin is the one who went on the voyage on the Beagle, not his grandfather. All right? Tell the person next to you, how well did you know those scientists? All right. So now let's take a focus just on Charles Darwin. You want to think about his trip as he's going around the Galapagos Islands. He was looking at things like seashells and he was going, wow, those seashells are above the water. Then maybe at one time this land right here must have been covered in water, which makes you think about geologic evolution, which would make you think about biological evolution. Also, when you look at those fossils, you could see things going from simple to more complex. He looked at biogeography. He looked at, you typically had the same kind of animals in jungles where you had the same kind of animals in deserts. He didn't know about plate tectonics. We know about that now. When he looked at fossils, he said some of these fossils resemble modern day organisms. So the idea was in his head that maybe our modern day organisms descended from these earlier organisms. He looked at similarities, like I said, in biogeography, and did God specifically create this one here and this one here, or could they have come from a common ancestor? He saw like earthquakes, we talked about that, but the thing with the turtles, what was the thing about the turtles that you remember? Arch. Which ones had an arch? Yeah, the ones that had to reach up higher in order to get at what they were eating, they had an arch in their shell. Those who didn't have to reach up high when their food was on the ground, their shell would go straight across, but these had an arch to them. And so that made him think, okay, these are adapted to this island, and these are adapted to that island. It's not like God made them with an arch on this one and without an arch right here. It was their food supply and certain characteristics made them more likely to survive. Remember, he's thinking about the struggle for existence, and only certain ones are going to survive, and those who have that arch would. He looked at ones that were unique to the islands, where there was a lot of competition on those small islands to survive, and they were exploiting each of their unique areas of their habitat. And we talk about adaptive radiation, and we'll talk about that too in the next chapter. So it took him a while to publish because he knew there would be a lot of argument against that. And who pushed him to publish? That's right, Wallace. And it's Wallace who came up with the idea of survival of the fittest while he was trying to survive malaria. And he had a lot of similar ideas. He came up with them, years later, but he had a lot of similar ideas, and so they co-published. So he looked at biogeographical areas as well. That was important to him, that certain organisms were developing in certain regions, certain areas. And then the basic premise of natural selection, first of all, you have too many offspring that are born. Not all are going to survive. So and then of the offspring you have, it's super important that you remember variations. You have to have variations. Otherwise, why would one survive and another one not, right? And those variations also had to be heritable. It had to be in your what? Genes. Now, he didn't know that at the time, right? He didn't know about DNA. He didn't know about chromosomes or any of that. But it had to be something that you could pass on. And some of those variations made you better adapted to that particular environment, which made you more likely to survive and reproduce, which we call, what do you call it when you measure somebody's ability to survive and reproduce? It starts with an F. Fitness. Good job, fitness. Okay, so it was important that there were variations. There was a struggle. Some are going to survive, some are not. We talked about fitness already. Adaptations, these are traits that you would have selected by nature. We looked at the eagle. Okay, what's the difference between parallel evolution and convergent evolution? Do you remember? So they're unrelated, and they end up with the same way to respond in their environment, right? There's lots of examples of organisms that have wings, but it doesn't mean they're all related. Now, if you do have a common ancestor in your ancestral past and you end up with the same adaptation, but you're related, what kind of evolution is that? Parallel. Good job. Okay. Darwin knew about artificial selection, where they were selecting for certain birds or certain dogs or certain horse, and so that was artificial selection. So if you had vast amounts of time, couldn't nature do the same thing that man did in a short amount of time, right? And I already talked about that. Okay, and then this brings us to evidence for evolution. What I want you to try to do, especially if you're taking notes right now, or in your head, try to come up with 5 pieces of evidence for evolution. See if you can just come up with it on your own. Or talk about it with your bio buddy. I'll pause just for a minute while you have a chance to do that. Okay, did you come up with some? Did you come up with these? Oh, not those. Did you come up with puppies and artificial selection? Oh my gosh, here we are. Did you come up with these? Okay, what is this one right here? Do you know what this is a picture of? Right there? Fossils. So to be a fossil, how old do you have to be? 10,000 years old. It's in your notes, right? You're just so tired, you're just hanging in there. You're just being respectful. That's okay, I still love you. So to be a fossil, you have to be 10,000 years old. Did we talk, one argument that's made against fossils as evidence is they say there's no transitional fossils. There's no showing you going between to a fish to an amphibian to a reptile, and a reptile to a mammal, etc. But there are several transitional fossils that are out there. Fish, amphibian, amphibian to a reptile, reptile, bird. And also you can see organisms going from simple to complex in development. And so that's one piece of evidence you could use in an argument for evolution. Second one is biogeography. We already talked about that. But bringing in the level of like plate tectonics, you can certainly see the variations in mammals when the plates were all together. So organisms could spread everywhere, and you would expect that. And you see similar organisms, like a similar type of fern. But once the plates separated about 65 million years ago, you start to see unique organisms on each continent. And that's about the time mammals were evolving. And so that would explain, that would be the biogeography, that would be the evidence of evolution happening, because if they were together it could spread, but if they were different places, they had unique adaptations to their environment. They're still large herbivores, right? But they're just different types on different continents. All right, yeah, that's good. Now, an endemic species is only found in one location, and would be unique to that area. Anatomical evidence. There are 3 pieces of anatomical evidence. One is on the board. Can you think of the other 2? Okay, so this one's homologous. What are the other 2? What? One starts with a V. Vestigial structures. One starts with an E. Embryological. Good. Okay. So this first, so make sure under your umbrella of anatomical evidence that you remember there are 3 underneath there. Homologous structure is saying homo means same, so same anatomy. So if I have the same anatomy, I must have DNA that codes for that similar anatomy. That must mean my DNA is similar. Okay? Analogous structures just have to do with function, not structure. Okay? So you can have structures that are homologous and analogous, or homologous only, or analogous only. So if something was homologous and analogous, what could you think of something that's homologous and analogous? Wing-wise? So structure and function is the same. A bird and a bat both have wings for flying. That's analogous, but they also have the same anatomy. That's homologous, right? But if I said it was analogous only, that would be like a bird and a bee, right? Because they both have wings, but they don't have the same anatomy. Follow? Okay. All right. So another piece then about. So don't use analogous as a piece of evidence. That's just same function. That could be a result of what kind of evolution? Convergent evolution, right? Homologous structures are your evidence for evolution. Vestigial structures pointing to your ancestral past, where you may have come from. That's another piece of anatomical evidence. Like withered eyes when you're a salamander that lives inside of a cave, because that's saying that at one time you probably were not living in a cave and you did need eyes, but you've moved into that cave and you've adapted to that cave. So eyes are no longer necessary. And then embryological development, when you look at similarity in embryological development, maybe you had a common ancestor. And then when you look even at how we develop in our embryos, it's like evolution on fast forward. Like, we have gills, we have a tail, okay, no we don't. So it's like that same evolutionary pathway that we took. Another piece of evidence is biochemical evidence, because certain things are universal, like what happens in all cells? Good, and then what step of it? Glycolysis always occurs in the cytoplasm, right? Every living thing does that. So we have similar enzymes, we have some similar proteins, ATP, DNA is universal, right? In the idea of how it codes and what bases are in there. So when you make comparisons, you can compare something like a protein that's found in every organism, and the more similar it is, the more closely they are related. And then the last one is focusing on control mechanisms in embryological development. Okay, and then I think that is it on that. Yes, that is it on that. There are some, I don't know, there are some questions here.
Back into this area.
I wonder if I can start 2 of these at once. There's 4 questions there. I think they're good to get you ready for your quiz. All done? Yeah, if I can start 2 at the same time. This is what I'm wondering. I'm going to pause you. It's okay if you're wrong. Okay, let's do these real quick. The flipper of a dolphin and the fin of the tuna are analogous only, right? Because they don't have the same anatomy. They just have the same function. The wing of a bat and the arm of the human are homologous structures. They are also analogous, but they're homologous is what you want to point to. Because we don't do the same They're not analogous because we don't have the same function,
Okay.
right? I'm sorry. I don't know what I just said a second ago. Which of the following is not an example of vestigial structure? Dog still uses its kidney,
Yeah.
right?
Hopefully.
Yes, and that's true.
Okay.
Okay, good?
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. You too, you guys. Make good choices. Okay, do your class period, then last name, first name. And yay. Okay, eat some toast. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving break.